Elixir 1.8. Elixir 1.8 comes with many improvements at the infrastructure level, improving compilation time, speeding up common patterns, and adding features around introspection of the system. Custom struct inspections. Elixir now provides a derivable implementation of the inspect protocol. In a nutshell, this means it is really easy to filter data from your data structures whenever they are inspected. For example, imagine you have a user struct with security and privacy sensitive information. User, dev struct, ID, name, age, email, encrypted password. By default, if you inspect a user via inspect user, it will include all fields. This can cause fields such as email and encrypted password to appear in logs, error reports, etc. You could always define a custom implementation of the inspect protocol for such cases, but Elixir 1.8 makes it simpler by allowing you to derive the inspect protocol. So we use the derive tag and send in a tuple where the first element is inspect, and then we have some keyword arguments. Here only the attributes that we want to be available to inspect or to be printed. Now all user structs will be printed with all the remaining fields collapsed. You can also pass at derive, inspect, except in the case you want to keep all fields but by default and exclude only some. Time zone database support. In Elixir 1.3, Elixir added 4 types known as calendar types to work with dates and times. Time, date, naive date time without a time zone, and date time with a time zone. Over the last releases, we have added many enhancements to the calendar types, but the date time module always evolved at a slower pace since Elixir did not provide support for a time zone database. Elixir 1.8 now defines a calendar time zone database behavior, allowing developers to bring in their own time zone databases. By defining an explicit contract for time zone behaviors, Elixir can now extend the datetime API, adding functions such as datetime shift zone 3. By default, Elixir ships with a time zone database called calendar UTC only time zone database that only handles UTC. Other calendar related improvements include the addition of date, day of year 1, date, quarter of year 1, date, year of era 1, and date, day of era 1. Faster compilation and other improvements, and other performance improvements. Due to improvements to the compiler made over the last year, Elixir 1.8 should compile about 5 times faster on average. This is yet another release where we have been able to reduce compilation times and provide a more joyful development experience to everyone. The compiler also emits more efficient code for range checks in guards, such as x in y ... for charless with interpolation, such as foo that interpolate bar has, and when working with records via the record module. Finally, embedded EX templates got their own share of optimizations, emitting more compact code that runs faster. Improved instrumentation and ownership with $callers. The task module is one of the most common ways to spawn lightweight processes to perform work concurrently. Whenever you spawn a new process, Elixir annotates the parent of that process through the ancestors key. This information can be used by instrumentation tools to track the relationship between events occurring within multiple processes. However, many times, tracking the $ancestors is not enough. For example, we recommend developers to always start tasks under a supervisor. This provides more visibility and allows us to control how these tasks are terminated when a node shuts down. In your code, this can be done by invoking something like task supervisor start child my supervisor task specification. This means that although your code is the one who invokes the task, the actual parent of the task would be the supervisor, as the supervisor is the one spawning it. We would list the supervisor as one of the ancestors for the task, but the relationship between your code and the task is lost. In Elixir 1.8, we now track the relationship between your code and task via the $callers key in the process dictionary, which aligns well with the existing ancestors key. Therefore, assuming the task supervisor call above, we have your code calls supervisor spawns task, which means we store the following relationships: ancestor and caller. When a task is spawned directly from your code without a supervisor, the process running your code will be listed under both ancestors and callers. This small feature is powerful. It allows instrumentation and monitoring tools to better track and relate the events happening in your system. This feature can also be used by tools like Ecto Sandbox. The Ecto Sandbox allows developers to run tests concurrently against the database. By using transactions and an ownership mechanism where each process explicitly gets a connection assigned to it. Without the $callers, every time you spawn a task that queries the database, the task would not know its caller, and therefore it would be unable to know which connection was assigned to it. This often meant features that rely on tasks could not be tested concurrently. With $callers, figuring out this relationship is trivial, and you have more tests using the full power of a machine. So, enhancements, embedded Elixir optimize the default template engine to compile and execute more efficiently. Elixir calendar, add calendar time zone database, and a UTC only time zone database implementation. Add callbacks for day of year 3, quarter of year 3, year of era 1. Code formatter, preserve user's choice of new line after most operators. Date time, add date time from naive 3, date time now, and date time shift zone 3. File allow raw option in file exists 2, file regular 2, and file dir 2. Add a POSIX time as an integer to file in file touch to. Inspect the derivable protocol. Kernel. Do not propagate counters to variables in quote inside another quote. Kernel. Warn on ambiguous use of double colon and pipe in type specs. Kernel. Add delegate to at doc meta tag when using def delegate. Kernel. Improve compile time building of ranges via the ... operator. Compile charlist interpolation more efficiently. Add floor 1 and sill 1 guards. Kernel special forms. Add reduce option to 4 comprehensions. List. Add list Myers difference 3 and list improper 1. Macro. Add macro struct 2. Add macro struct bing 2 for proper struct resolution during compile time. Map. Optimize and merge nested maps, put and merge operations. Range. Add range disjoint 2. Record. Reduce memory allocation when updating multiple fields in a record. Registry. Allow associating a value on via tuple. String. Add string bag distance 2. Task. Add $callers tracking to task. This makes it easier to find which process spawned a task and use it for tracking ownership and monitoring. XUnit. Add XUnit after suite 1 callback. XUnit assertions. Show last n messages instead of first n from mailbox on assert receive fail. IEX helpers. Add port 1 and port 2. IEX server. Expose IEX server.run1 for custom IEX sessions and the ability to broker pry sessions. Mix. Add mix target 0 and mix target 1 to control dependency management per target. Mix project. Add depth and parents option to depth paths. Mix archive install. Add a timeout when installing archives. Mix compile. Include optional dependencies in extra applications. Mix eScript install. Add a timeout when installing eScripts. Mix format. Warn when the same file may be formatted by multiple .formatter.exs. Mix test. Allow setting the maximum number of failures via the max failures flag. Mix test. Print a message instead of raising on unmatched tests inside umbrella projects. Bug fixes. In Elixir. Calendar. Allow printing dates with more than 9,999 years. Exception. Exclude deprecated functions in did you mean hints. Float. Handle subnormal floats in float ratio 1. Kernel. Remove guard test tuple size can never succeed. Dialyzer warning on try. Kernel. Expand operands in size times unit bitstream modifier instead of expecting size, and unit to be literal integers. Kernel. Do not deadlock on circular struct dependencies in type specs. Kernel. Raise proper error message when passing flags to the Erlang compiler that Elixir cannot handle. Kernel. Do not leak variables in cond clauses with a single matching at compile time clause. Naive datetime. Do not accept leap seconds in builder and parsing functions. String. Fix ZWJ handling in Unicode grapheme clusters. String IO. Handle non-printable args in string IO gracefully. IEX helpers. Use typespec info instead of docs and properly format callbacks in B1. Logger. Allow logger backends to be dynamically removed when an application is shutting down. Mix. Mix compile. Ensure changes in depths propagate to all umbrella children. This fixes a long-standing issue where updating a dependency would not recompile all projects accordingly, requiring a complete removal of _build. Mix compile. Avoid time drift when checking and updating compiler manifest files. Mix compile app. Respect the only option between umbrella siblings. Mix compile protocols. Reconsolidate protocols if local dependencies are stale. Mix depths. Properly mark dependencies with different system env as diverged. Mix new. Use the module value. Use module value when setting up file names. Hard deprecations. Soft deprecations, none. Hard deprecations. Passing a non-empty list to enum into 2 was inconsistent with maps, and it is deprecated in favor of kernel++ or keyword merge 2. Inspect algebra. Surround 3 is deprecated in favor of inspect algebra concat 2 and inspect algebra nest 2. Inspect algebra. Surround many 6 is deprecated in favor of container doc 6. Kernel. Using @since will now emit an unused attribute warning. Use doc since 1.7.2 instead. Kernel. Passing a non-empty list as into 4 comprehensions was inconsistent with maps and is now deprecated in favor of kernel++ 2 or kernel merge 2. Kernel parallel compiler files 2 is deprecated in favor of files 2 is deprecated in favor of compile 2. Kernel parallel compiler files to path 2 deprecated in favor of compile to path 2. Kernel parallel require files 2 is deprecated in favor of kernel parallel compiler require 2. Parallel require. System seconds, milliseconds, etc. as time units is deprecated in favor of second, millisecond, etc. System.cwd0 and system.cwd_bang0 are deprecated in favor of file cwd. Mix compile Erlang, returning OK contents tuple or error as a callback in mix compiler's Erlang compile 6 is deprecated in favor of returning OK contents warnings tuple or errors warnings tuple. Right. That's the patch notes on Elixir 1.8.0.